I read in some of the reporting that there are those who've expressed opinions against Gail's because of its association or connections with Israel. It was founded by Israelis, and in fact, they're people that I've met several times. So apparently, the fact that it was started by and once owned by Israelis has put off some people in that area from it opening in the neighbourhood. Of course, they have literally no ownership, no interest in it anymore. They sold the whole thing. But I think it just reveals that those sorts of boycotters who in the past have said they were really trying to boycott very specific Israeli organisations, Israeli companies, in order to discourage, say, settlements in disputed territories in the West Bank, actually just want to boycott anything to do with Israel. I mean, I know those people who are no longer involved, I reiterate, and they are peace-loving people. They're on the left in Israel. They're against this government. They're the kind of people, actually, who presumably the boycotters would want to encourage in the land of Israel, unless, of course, their real objection to Israelis is just that they're Jewish, they exist, and they're in the Levant in the first place.
I used to work at a water company when I was 16. It was my first job, and we had customers calling up saying they wanted their water meters out because they were made in Israel. So, and that was, how old am I now? That was about 15, 16 years ago.
Well, I saw a thing online, actually, of one of these Palestine groups that was saying they wanted to go and shut down the UK headquarters of Teva, which is the company that makes 1 in 5 of the drugs we use on the NHS. I was actually there covering Kemi Badenoch's trip to Israel when she was in the government, and I saw the facilities there that make it possible for Britain to enjoy cheap generic drugs. Again, another piece of extremely good trade that Israel and Britain have. Those people want to shut down the very things that are making the NHS work.
Do these petitions work, though? Aren't they just a bit of a load of hot air online? I mean, do they actually work? Does anyone really pay attention to them, apart from the people signing them?
Well, I think they work to show us the hypocrisy of the people that are necessarily showing themselves up. I mean, again, we look at the idea of two-tier policing, for example, in relation to anti-Semitism. Many Jewish people over recent times have been saying that while, of course, everybody supports violent protesters at the moment being fast-tracked through the courts and possibly into prison where it's actually valid. There are many comparisons coming out at the moment. For example, that man who was put in jail very quickly for his "who the F is Allah" comment was contrasted with reports over those people who drove through a very Jewish area a few years ago with megaphones on their cars, Palestinian PLO flags over the bonnets, shouting "F the Jews, rape their daughters." Those people were let off without any charges. So the contrast between the two things, I think, just shows that there is an element of two-tier policing. And when it comes, of course I believe it. It's evident to anybody in the Jewish community who looks at how those hate marches took place every single week with violence, with chants against Jews, both in Arabic and in English, threats against Jews. And those people weren't fast-tracked through the court. Even the Rape Their Daughters crew, who they had identified, they knew who was driving, they had tracking data, they knew who the cars belonged to, and yet they said there wasn't enough evidence to put them through the courts. Those people are free on the streets now. And I don't need to remind people that on the 7th of October in Israel, what did the Palestinian terrorists and many civilians do? They entered Israel and F the Jews and raped their daughters. This is a threat that we need to take seriously from extremist Islam, and the police and the Crown Prosecution Service didn't in that case, and they're showing themselves up now by being so quick and rigorous with what they call exclusively far-right protesters at the moment. Now, I must say, I'm totally against the violence of the protests at the moment, but the same resolve should be shown against those who displayed anti-Semitic lust for rape and murder.
What do you make of Sadiq Khan's comments, was it last week, saying he now feels unsafe as a Muslim in Britain or indeed his own city? Because I did, on one of my other shows, I said, oh, Sadiq, maybe you know how the minority Jewish community feel in Britain over the past 10 months. What do you make of his words?
I'm very sorry to hear if that's how he feels. Of course, he is somebody that has a great deal of control over these things within our community. So if he feels that there is a threat against minorities such as his own, then he's in a great position to do something about it. Jews, of course, regular Jews on the street, don't have the platform or the power that he does in order to make a change.
Do you think Sadiq did enough, though, to kind of defend, or has done enough currently to defend the Jews against some of the hateful rhetoric we've seen at those marches? this?
No, I don't.
I think he's been a bit lacklustre.
I think Sadiq Khan has very much held back when it came to doing anything about the protests. For example, many of those protests, hate marches, whatever you want to call them, those anti-Israel marches, took place on Saturday mornings, the Jewish Sabbath. They went past synagogues. Jews were even on occasion told that they should move their regular prayer service time because there could be some sort of threat to them coming out from the people in the marches. You'll remember the Holocaust Memorial was covered up because the march was going to go past it. Now, Holocaust memorials are actually there to remind us of the horrors of anti-Semitism and violence against Jews. Those are the very people actually who need reminding. We should put up more Holocaust memorials on their paths rather than cover up in a sort of blue tarpaulin burqa those that already exist. And Sadiq Khan didn't do, as far as I can see, anything with his position as London Mayor to make Jews feel safer or more secure. And now coming out and saying this, I do have sympathy for him if he feels at risk, but I don't have a great deal of sympathy when he didn't do very much for the Jewish community, hasn't come out boldly to condemn the sorts of things that have been happening to Jewish people. And let's remember the reason this is happening against Jewish people. It was ignited, this violence against Jews, this bloodlust against Jews, the chanting against Jews, the chanting of death in Arabic against Jews, the Arabic war songs on the streets of London. All of these things were ignited by the 7th of October last year when Palestinian terrorists murdered, raped and kidnapped
some people
Jewish
argue
people.
The whole conflict was raging, well, of course it was, long before October the 7th, but yeah, indeed, that isolated incident. And I will say, someone said the other week how...
but that wouldn't excuse... Even if there's a conflict for 75 years, that doesn't excuse people having these views against Jewish people and carrying out this sort of violence and violent rhetoric on the streets of London. Jewish people are British people, and these threats that are against Jewish people, by the way, I need to remind everybody, are also threats against British values and Britain. The same threats that are against Jews for freedom of worship or freedom of existence are the very threats that see an Ariana Grande concert blown up, that see people carrying out death actions, carrying out terrorist actions, blowing themselves up, knifing people. I remember people having their throats cut in London Bridge. I remember in Westminster the car ramming. All of these things are the result of Islamic extremist terrorism. This is what's lying at the heart of people's discontent and unrest at the moment. Now, the fact that it's being expressed in such a problematic way, a violent way, and by people with a problematic way of expression is because there's nobody serious actually representing their views in the mainstream. And so people who feel very disenfranchised are doing absolutely the wrong thing and should be punished for it. But politicians need to start taking these concerns much more seriously.
OK, Jonathan Sacerdoti, thank you very much. Good to see you this morning.
Thanks, Jonathan.